Hello and welcome to WordBirds, a birds of a feather conversation amongst people that care about words. Today on the show, we have Wade Coleman. Wade is the Vice President of Content Strategy at the fintech and payments giant Fiserv. We're going to be talking about delivering a content strategy that's designed to put yourself in the shoes of your customers. We're bringing content to life via live in-person events, and we're going to talk about how the best content is invisible. So let's sit back and get some insight from the fly. Hello, Wade, and welcome to the show. Excited to have you here.
Thanks, Chris. Great to be here.
Let's go ahead and jump right into this with the quickfire. So I'm going to say some things. I just want you to have the first thing that jumps into your head. Amazing content is
invisible.
Concise or descriptive?
Depends.
The company with the best brand voice is?
I'm going to go with not a well-known brand, but a small brand. So Brooklyn Tea.
Okay. Best piece of content advice?
Ask questions.
And when I'm creating content, I always
think about the consumer.
Invisible. Let's go back to that. Tell me what you mean.
I think when you're creating content that people are consuming, that they don't know that they're consuming marketing, and that's stuff that they pass along to their friends, that they're sending to their boss to say, hey, we need to take a look at this. That's the type of content. And it's not tricky. It's not something that is underhanded. It's just truly useful to people. And so they forget that it's actually marketing.
Ooh, I love that. That's fantastic. Brooklyn Tea. Tell me a little bit about why.
So Brooklyn Tea is an interesting company. So Fiserv, my company, during the pandemic, we started a grant program for small businesses. One of our big lines of businesses is the Clover point of sale system. And what we saw was that small businesses were outsized impact by the pandemic. The Walmarts were still open. The Starbucks were still open, but it was the really small shops that suffered. And so we started a grant program called Back to Business, focused primarily in the beginning on Black-owned small businesses because those communities were outsized impact as well. And one of our grant recipients was a company called Brooklyn Tea, and really small shop. They had one shop in Brooklyn. They've expanded to 3 now, with 2 in Brooklyn and 1 in Atlanta. And what you get, what I love about them is that the brand voice is all around just a love of tea and educating people around tea. And they have a digital experience, an in-store experience that is seamless. They're doing all these things that you don't traditionally think about small businesses, but they have a fantastic origin story that is very similar to every great brand out there. And the Coca-Colas, every company has that story that you know. And to me, they exhibit that because it's all around tea.
It's great when your tone of voice, your entire outreach can be around something that you actually care about too. That's
exactly.
I have to imagine that's the center of their world, and they're just all aligned around that center.
Husband and wife team, really passionate about it, and there's a community around what they built around tea, and that's what's as well as their presence in the community. So that to me sort of exhibits what it's all about when you're developing a brand voice.
And a great brand is scalable, so you can grow that community just on the back of that brand.
Exactly.
Fantastic. So Wade, you're the Vice President of Content Strategy at Fiserv, fintech company, a lot of different audiences. Broadly, who are you creating content for?
So at the enterprise layer, we're creating content for our merchants, so small businesses, as well as our large enterprise clients, so folks who are running the payments operations at the major brands around the world, as well as financial institutions. And so virtually every part of a financial institution, from the front office to the back office. And so it's a lot of different audiences within there, but the sort of common thread through them all is sort of financing in commerce itself.
And you've already, I think, hinted at the style of the content that you create. You're creating actionable content. You're not just marketing at them. You're providing them with assistance that eventually will guide them towards you.
Exactly.
I mean, and I think that I like the idea of invisible content. I think that, when you, I don't know if you know Mike Volpe, the original CMO at HubSpot, but we were talking one day about his early strategy and then building in their conference, the big conference they have here in Boston. And he said, I do these things with the intent of bringing people in. They may never buy my product. They might not be big enough. They might not be the right audience, but we're building this audience around us for the eventuality that we have a product to fit them. And so a lot of what they did throughout the time that he was there was around actionable content creation to be assistive, regardless of who you are. Do you find that you're able to solve problems that you don't, with your content, that you don't even solve as a business, that eventually bring people in?
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it is making sure that that you're developing something that, it's not just product focused. It is really, broader than that. But it's around this community, and within all of those groups that I mentioned, we have communities that have very specific interest in things that they're looking to solve. And when you're developing, the content programs to address those, really looking at their needs individually within each one of those, what types of channels, where are they engaging, what's important to them, and then making sure that what you're developing around that is authentic and really does help them. And it depends, because some of the communities that we have are pretty small or small in context. They're not broad consumer audiences, but they're very interested in the inner workings of the ACH payment system. And so when you're developing content that's really niche like that, it does appeal to people that are broader than just your current existing client base. But at the core of it, it needs to be something that's helpful in moving them forward.
Absolutely. And you're in a competitive space. So assisting somebody in any way gives you a much higher percentage of possibility of bringing them back in as a customer eventually.
100%.
Yeah. So with the audience, I come from a traditional enterprise B2B approach where I know where to find the folks that I want to talk to. You have a much wider audience, much more diverse audience. How are you getting to these folks? How are you building a content strategy that allows to reach this wide space that you're reaching into?
Yeah, so I would turn it around a little bit, because part of what that is the consumer space that we work in with it's more the small business audience, but is really a broad consumer. And then we do have the financial services and the enterprise payments part, which are very different approaches. And so my team focuses more on the enterprise brand for all of Fiserv, but then also supporting the enterprise customers. And the Clover brand that we work with is very much integrated into the core of that messaging, but it is it's a consumer marketing approach. And so on the enterprise layer, one of the things that we look at of targeting directly to customers is like our client event. And so bringing in a much smaller community within the broader, having them come into our event, it's something where we're having them be the spokespersons. We're bringing in outside experts talking about the industry. We're having our own people there. That community then helps catapult the content that we're using the rest of the year. And that is then targeted to a much broader audience outside of just that one event. So I think that's something that is important to us from an event standpoint, and an experiential and a sales process and relationships with our clients. But it really helps amplify the messaging and the things that are what we find out at that event are helpful to us the rest of the year to marketing to that broad community that would be out there.
Oh, absolutely. It's, the lead up to any event is a hidden drain on a content organization right out of the gates. I think people don't think about that. We're doing a conference, it's field marketing. Well, kind of. It's kind of everybody, but there's a lot of content that's going to drive it, but it's also a huge test for what you're creating, the results of which help to guide the direction that you're going to move in as you go forward, because you're seeing consumption in real time. And are you getting feedback from folks in real time?
Yeah, I mean, you obviously, and that's the thing I think that's changed within, event and content marketing is that with the advent of apps and other tools where you're on site, it both amplifies it externally, but you're also getting real-time feedback on the session, because of the mobile app that you have there. It used to be that everybody was using Twitter and other apps to sort of communicate, throughout the event, but now you have, mobile apps that are really focused on that, which are, they're troves of data for using afterwards, but it's also giving you the really real-time survey on what people think about what's happening there based on, engagement stats and, direct comments and things like that.
It's great to get that kind of feedback. And I mean, so I assume you're bringing that back, you're using that, and that leads a lot of your follow-on content strategy. What would you say are your sort of top tips for creating a well-rounded content strategy?
I think, going back to, what is important for the audience that you're looking for, really putting yourself in their shoes, and then thinking about, the broader community itself. And so a lot of times, and I think, anyone in marketing and anyone in this role has kind of experienced this, is when you're working with stakeholders, they get really locked in on, I want a podcast, or I want a blog, or, it really is based on what they feel like is important to them. And, you got to love what you're doing, but at the same time, is that the right audience for who you're trying to reach? And often it's not. And so helping walk people through what are we trying to accomplish, and start with the questions on that. Who are we talking to? Building out the content plan at that high level strategy before you hone in on the tactics, I think is pretty fundamental. And that also, then from there you can be creative, you can ideate, you can build things that people really want to consume. But if you're building it for you versus the audience, it's not going to work.
Right. And so I guess an interesting question is, outside of the feedback that you get from the conference, how are you gauging, how are you measuring impact? Or maybe the question is, how are you measured? Somebody in the CEO's or the C-suite looks out the window and says, how is the content organization doing? What are the key indicators that they're looking at to gauge whether this is working or not?
Yeah, I think there are the base level engagement metrics that you get from the web and other places. And that really depends on where you are in your strategy. If it's really high level enterprise thought leadership and your goal is to bring the wider community in, you're looking at those broad funnel metrics. I think as you hone down in the funnel and how are you helping convert people? What content is helping move people through the stages? And I think that's what's interesting now, is that we are able to see more of that engagement data further on. It's not just page views and clicks and other things, but being able to map it back through tools like count-based marketing and other things like that. We're able to get more measures in there. I think the thing that is always hard with measurement, though, is making sure that you are connecting it to the consumers, and you still get that at the high level engagement metrics.
Yeah, I mean that is the challenge, because you can do things that get you results for results' sake, but you also have a brand to protect.
Yeah, and I think the metrics discussion, like you have to have it. You have to constantly be focused on it and be talking to your leaders about it. But often, because you have data or you have numbers, just because you can shine a light on a specific area doesn't necessarily mean that it's moving the needle for you. And so I think that's where you've got to match the data that you're getting back with the critical thinking on really what is moving the needle for consumers, and answer that question for your leadership.
And are you looking at things, I mean, from an iteration standpoint, you're looking at results and you're going back to your strategy drawing board? Are you looking at like tone of voice and terminology and clarity levels to tweak and dial in the performance of the content?
We are looking at really higher level metrics in that right now. I think that's the exciting part of, are we on tone? Are we on brand? Things like AI coming in and starting to experiment with that to make sure that we are hitting those areas. But most of what we're doing right now, we're still looking at the higher level metrics and then, analyzing those pieces, talking about them in an editorial way, seeing which ones are performing well. And, sometimes things that you think are just, you put a lot of time in and you think are going to resonate with the community, then do as well as you thought they would. And then others that you just spent a little bit of time on, they take off. And so going back and looking at the measurements in that way and understanding why. Was it a timing issue? Was it, what factor, within our distribution strategy impacted this? Can we reuse it at another time? I think those are the discussions that are ongoing, and it can be AI assisted, it can be technology and data assisted, but the human in that part of it that is looking at it with an editorial eye, understanding the audience that you're trying to reach is still important.
Yeah, I don't. It's not so much a question; it's just a statement. It's terrible when you've built a piece of content that you think is perfect.
Yeah,
like everything that you were looking for. It's on tone, clarity, consistency, character, all locked in. It's the message that you want. You put it out in the world and it just doesn't do anything. but this is perfect. It's exactly what we designed. Hard
to let your babies go.
Yeah, it's disappointing. Cool. Let's talk about thought leadership a little bit. I mean, how are you using thought leadership to drive your content experience for your audiences?
So I think it's starting at, understanding the audience, what we want to drive with them. We use a number of channels. I mean, it's really focused in on our website where we develop, blogs and other thought leadership content that is based on, issues that are important to our clients, but things that also that map back to what we're hearing in the industry, what we're hearing from our client events that we're going back, trying to stay relevant, but also making sure that it's not just content for engagement purposes. We do need to have, it needs to be a role where we're differentiating in it. We're not just trying to bring in a broad audience. We want to make sure that we're providing our brand positioning around this issue and presenting it in a way that helps people move forward with it.
Fantastic. And I mean, speaking of moving forward, how do you see this going forward? Where do you see Fiserv's branded content going out into the future?
I think the thing that it's sort of back to the future, because one of the things that happened was during the pandemic, we had this big pivot from our events and all the things that help drive content strategy around that, and being able to develop blog posts and campaigns that target people that either went to our events or topics that were generated from it, to really doing everything in a digital environment, and that was a great learning experience for us. I think that we built muscles in digital that we needed to have, that because we were a very relationship focused, B2B at the enterprise level, focused on those types of things. It made us work in different ways, but we also learned how important the experiential part was to us as well. And so now that we're back in this environment where we have live events and that we're connecting with our clients on that level, it is matching what we learned during the pandemic, adding that rigor of digital, understanding, what booths people interacted with at a show, what things were they interested in an app, what are we learning from the sessions that they did attend and how they rated them, putting all that together and improving our digital presence so that we're looking at each stage, each channel, and marrying all of those together.
I love that, because it's the first time I've heard anybody say it. That we made the digital shift on March 11th of 2020 when everybody went home from work and never came back. And you're saying, yeah, that's great. We learned a bunch of things. But what worked before might, and in fact does work now, that we can go back out in the world. So it's taking the best of the last 3 years and then tacking that on top, making it additive to the experience you had built before, which I just think is a really neat way of looking at it.
Yeah, and I think it's different for different companies, and it's different for different markets. For us, that experiential relationship part is important because these are very long-term relationships. They're with a financial institution, that's they look at every aspect of it. There's a lot of trust there, and when you're working in financial services and money, it's different from that perspective. And so understanding that we can what we lost during the pandemic during a digital event is helpful in the early stages of that relationship and the ongoing maintenance for it, but nothing replaces face-to-face in those. And so it's making sure that we're building community in digital environment, but also maintaining that in the real world.
Fantastic. Now is the time in the show when I like to just dig into things that get people worked up. It's the provocative statement of the day, or PSOTD. What is your provocative statement of the day?
I think AI is going to be a tremendously good thing for content marketing.
Go on.
And the reason that I say that, is it's been fascinating to me because it goes back to even just this theme in literature of Frankenstein and Blade Runner. The robots are going to take over and they're going to replace people. And what is consciousness? And if it's not created by fully by a human being, that it's somehow less. And when I look at AI and when I use it, I think a lot of the debate is really it's just a reflection of who we are. But the other piece of it is that you look at creativity, you look at content development. Every time there's a transformative technology or a new technology, people get really afraid because it is going to be disruptive, and there is going to be that that element, the Luddite rebellion, where people are pushing back on it, and there are legitimate issues that do come up with that. But ultimately, it's about making us better. And did Da Vinci say, "Oh, I'm not going to use that type of oil in my paint because this is not true"? And of course, we're all Da Vincis in marketing. But the bigger issue for me is that it's going to make us better. And there are places that they're just like the internet, just like every disruptive technology. We're going to see misuse of it and people using it in the wrong way, but that doesn't mean that it's not going to be something that's going to be tremendously useful to us. And I look forward to it.
And I like that attitude because I think sitting where I sit, I work at a software company that's involved in content governance, and it would be very easy for me to be the guy in the off-ramp holding the sign that says the world is ending. But that guy's crazy. He might be right. I mean, look outside. It probably is. Got aliens now. But I don't want to be that guy. And I want to find ways to find the positive in this. And generative AI as a solution area is super powerful. But it's just another content channel. It's another place to get something. It solves some problems from a velocity standpoint, but it doesn't solve all your problems. And there's still a lot to do. And I think that's where this keeps the human element. I'm not concerned for content creators because there's generative AI. I think it becomes more important than ever because if we don't have people creating content, generative AI will eventually start telling its own story. And that story won't be very interesting.
If generative AI is just generating BS, that's not going to help us. And I think that is the enemy, and any content marketer's job is to really shift through that and make sure that you're getting things that are on tone, on message to your audience and getting results. And that's not going to come from generating a lot of material. And so having the human element involved in it is absolutely critical.
Awesome. Wade, thanks very much for being on the show. Look forward to getting you back in the future. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks for listening to WordBirds. WordBirds is hosted by Chris Willis, produced by Charlotte Baxter Reed, and brought to you by Acrolinks. For more information on Acrolinks, visit www.acrolinks.com.